All right. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome to our conversation today about whether or not crypto can or is climate friendly. We're talking to two really forward thinkers in this space. Let me bring them on stage now. First, we have Max Song, the founder of Carbon-Base, and we will also be talking to Donovan Choi, who is an editor at Bankless. Hi, guys. Welcome to the session today.
Hello, hi everyone. Happy to be
Hey,
here.
Donovan.
Excited to get in the conversation.
Yeah, of course. Donovan, if you can maybe just do a quick introduction for yourself. Okay, sorry guys, just a second. We're gonna get everybody's video back online. All right, Max, I see you, and Donovan, hopefully any minute now. Okay, maybe Max, while you're on stage at the moment, can you do a quick introduction to yourself and Carbon-Base?
Of course. Thank you, Maria. Pleasure to be here, everyone. Max, I am the founder and CEO of Carbon-Base. We are a climate technology company here in Asia, and we've been working actively the last 2.5 years on building technology solutions to help companies measure, reduce, and also create carbon credits. We've been big believers of the blockchain from the beginning, and we think that NFTs, metaverse, and the actual use of the DLT technology to record carbon emission and transactions is one of the most powerful tools actually to use crypto as a force for good and hopefully actually help us decarbonize in reference to the climate change challenge.
Okay, nice. Thanks for that. Donovan, we can't see you, but is your audio working? All right, he has gone blank for a second. Let's forge ahead. So here's how I was thinking to structure the conversation today. So I've pulled some popular internet opinions about climate and crypto, and then I want to put them up to both Max and Donovan one by one to see if they either agree with the statement, want to debunk it, or perhaps clarify it. So there are three of them, and we're going to go through them, and then I think more generally get into what Max and Donovan work on day to day. So at the same time, of course, like we have our open chat channel. So drop any of your questions, comments, or opinions into the chat box, and we will also get through as many of those as we can in the time here. All right, so internet opinion number one, the energy that it takes to mine crypto is unjustified. Thus, crypto is inherently bad for the environment. Is that true, false, or maybe?
So it's a great question. My thought is that if we look at Bitcoin as purely a speculative asset investment class, then any amount of energy that goes into it is too much. But if we look at Bitcoin actually as a global reserve asset, then we start thinking about the world very differently. Especially with the current Ukraine crisis, we start to see the very visible arm of the global banking rails. People who have been sanctioned can no longer access any of the traditional technology stacks. For example, what Russia is going through. I think many countries are considering other alternatives to this centralized system, and Bitcoin happens to be one of the most likely candidates. Small countries like El Salvador are already starting to take some of their foreign currency reserves and actually allocate over to the assets. So from that perspective, when we think about how do we actually build a single country denominated reserve asset, that's where I think Bitcoin really has a place to shine. And that's how I personally sort of look at, how we, decide energy trade-offs in this particular space. Having said this, I want to make one small comment, which is that it's not inevitable that Bitcoin's energy consumption has to be environmentally destructive. If we actually use renewable energy, that actually starts to make it much more feasible. So something I've been very focused on actually is designing an economically incentivized protocol actually to help miners decide to use more energy, more clean energy, and as a result, that actually increase their bottom line and increase their environmental stance as well.
Okay, so I heard two critical parts of this. One is, of course, like the actual energy usage, which isn't related specifically to crypto, but it's like across the board, like what kind of energy systems is actually powering whatever you're using it for, right? And so the incentives to move crypto miners in particular to more renewable sources. And then the second one, I think, is much more of like a cost benefit analysis argument, right? So depending on what how you're treating Bitcoin in particular. So if it's a speculative asset, then definitely not worth the energy usage. But if it is in terms of like a global financial alternative, then potentially justified. Sorry, do you want to maybe share more about the incentive structure for the miners and then shifting them towards more renewable sources? Like how does it work and like what kind of results you've seen so far?
Sure. So we've been actually thinking about this for about 9 months now, right? Actually, before Elon and the whole kind of Tesla, criticism of Tesla buying Bitcoin. So if we look at the market, there's really kind of 2 key design parameters we have to think about. The first is the fungibility of Bitcoin. People who have traditionally proposed solutions to this space have actually said we should tag every single Bitcoin. Bitcoin that are green should be tagged, Bitcoin that are not green should be tagged, and then they can never touch each other. This to us actually is a massive decrease in the total utility of Bitcoin. So instead, we actually drew a lot of inspiration from something called the renewable energy certificate market. Now, the REC market is what Google, Amazon, Facebook, and Tesla uses actually when they want to make claims about being renewably powered, right? So Amazon said, we're going to be running all our data centers in green energy. They use the REC market. The REC market is beautiful because it actually separates the point of production and traceability from actually trying to tag individual electrons. It's very difficult to tag electrons, you might imagine. So when a solar power plant or wind power plant produces clean energy, they actually receive from a third-party auditor a set of certificates representing 100 megawatt hours of green electricity that they produce. And when Tesla buys green power, they can buy power from the grid. They also have to go and procure the same amount of certificates, and holding certificates and energy in total in together allows them to make certain claims. So, hey, Donovan. And what we've done is actually design a similar model. So miners who actually verify that they are indeed using sustainable energy get to actually receive sustainable Bitcoin certificates. These certificates are separate to the Bitcoin network, but they sort of are parallel to it. And so far, we've talked to some of the largest listed miners in the world. One of our supporters actually is Jihan Wu, the co-founder of Bitmain. And we also have several large asset and institutional finance guys. So the process of actually building an ecosystem in order to create a new standard for sustainability in digital assets is something that we're really passionate about. And from an economic return perspective, the miners actually that do decide to embark on getting more green energy into their mix actually will be economically rewarded with the sale of these SPCs. And we think the SPCs actually be worth more than cost of production, actually creating an additional revenue stream for the miners. For Fidelity or BlackRock or any large institutional investor, they are very curious and interested. Actually, they had exposure, but they need to make sure that they're compliant on their ESG reporting. This is why they need to make sure that they're actually purchasing green Bitcoin, so they're willing to spend the extra premium required to actually own the green certificate as well. So that's kind of a snapshot of how it works. Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. Donovan, nice to see you back here. So maybe actually we'll just combo these two. So if you can do a quick introduction of yourself, and then the first internet opinion that we're trying to unpack is whether or not the energy that it takes to mine crypto is justified and whether or not crypto is inherently bad for the environment.
Yeah, I'm sorry, guys. My internet is terrible right now. So if you lose track of me, please just go with Max. But mainly, I've been doing research and writing in crypto for a long time across many different publications. But mainly, I'm an editor at Bankless. I didn't quite catch that question. Was it why? Could you repeat the question, please?
Okay. Would you agree or disagree with the statement that the energy that it takes to mine crypto is unjustified and thus crypto is inherently bad for the environment?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think a lot of the contempt and disdain for blockchains and crypto and its environmental footprint stems mainly from a misunderstanding or lack of understanding about what the technology can do, right? Like nobody will say that air conditioning or cars is a waste of energy because we know how productive these technologies are for people's lives, right? But it's so hard to tell what actually crypto can do right now because it's still so nascent and the space is so innovative. So at least in the here and now, I think that the biggest use cases for crypto are probably stable coins, particularly in inflation rampant economies, right? In Singapore or in countries like Singapore, that's probably irrelevant for us because our currency is stable. But for people who's living in Greece or Venezuela, whose currencies are experiencing 40% inflation, stable coins are a huge game changer. So I guess to answer your question, is it an environmental waste? Or the people in Greece and Venezuela would beg to differ, right? having that public ledger where you can process transactions and, more importantly, keep your money, keep your capital in a way that doesn't erode over time, that is tremendously valuable for these people who are living in these economies. I guess maybe in the context of developed economies, the question gets a little bit harder to answer, right? I guess it's hard to, when people are talking about like trading $1 million JPEGs, NFTs, right? It's hard for them to understand intuitively what exactly is how does this add to the humanitarian value of it in particular. And I think there are a lot of there's definitely a lot of speculative trading, which doesn't really add any value, but there is also a lot of concrete use cases. And I guess one example off the top of my head would be the Ukraine-Russia war, right? And in the moment when the war erupted, a lot of people were donating NFTs, digital assets to to Ukraine. And there you have like a concrete use case where digital assets were actually helping towards a concrete crisis that is happening and developing in real time.
Yeah. Okay. Amazing. I actually love it because you two gave very similar answers on this one, which is, as a speculative investment, it's not necessarily worth the energy consumption, but if you can identify genuine use cases, and obviously I think you both have pointed out some great ones, then yeah, potentially. The answer is really, what are you using the energy consumption for? Thanks for that nuance. Okay. Popular internet opinion number 2. So any Web3 initiatives such as NFT, DeFi, DAOs, et cetera, because they are built on these energy inefficient blockchains, by association, they are also potentially bad for the environment. Agree, disagree, or maybe?
I would maybe push back a little bit against the claim that blockchains are energy inefficient. So presumably this line of criticism is fixated on proof of work blockchains like Bitcoin and Ethereum currently, right? There's a really good book, right? That was written a couple of years ago. I think, if I remember correctly, the name of the book was called The Block Size Wars. And it was basically a journalist chronicling the short history of Bitcoin going a few years back. And it's a fantastic book because it perfectly captures a lot of concentrated Bitcoin interests and industry players that have tried to change the Bitcoin network to their own favor. And the book is just a fantastic history of how all of these attempts failed, right? And the reason why they failed is because the network, the Bitcoin network, was designed in a way that made it impossible for even a large majority to change it, right? It needed something like 95% consensus before you could make those huge changes to the network. So, when people say that the Bitcoin network is energy inefficient, it depends on how much you value that resistant towards people trying to manipulate a network towards their own ends, right? Of course, you could theoretically have a very, very centralized network. That would be a very low carbon footprint to the blockchain, but then it will be susceptible to so much more manipulation and so much more kinds of like lobby group interests trying to change it to their favor, right? So yeah. It really boils back down to what you think the purpose of a blockchain network serves.
Yeah. So actually on this design question, and maybe Max, you can weigh in here. So obviously, as Don mentioned, and then Tim in the chat box is talking about, but like Bitcoin was designed specifically to be decentralized, which necessarily requires a decent amount of energy in order to push any of the changes through. This is the whole point of proof of work. But obviously, with Ethereum and then the updates to the Ethereum network, like people are starting, or these chains are starting to move away from it. Max, what do you think the future necessarily potentially holds for these blockchains, and will we always be in this like energy high consuming situation because of the design, or do you think the design will update and evolve?
Well, I think Ethereum is actually very well on its way to do the proof of stake transition, which is going to reduce its energy consumption by 99%. And I think after Ethereum, every single other smart contract platform is going to be run proof of stake and have very minimal profile. So Solana, for example, we did some references, and Solana is like, the entire network is roughly about 1,500 US households of energy a year. which, sort of compared to $60 billion economy is like, decent amount of cost ratio. So to me, really, there's going to be Bitcoin, and then there's going to be everything else. And I just want to offer a kind of sort of maybe unconventional thought, which is if you were to design a monetary system that was trying to enforce scarcity, and you had a choice of anchoring it to some physical process in the real world, anchoring it to energy actually is probably one of the most pure things you can do, because many other physical processes can actually be gamed. You can actually, sort of have all kinds of, crazy phenomenon. Like people don't remember that we used to run on gold and gold and silver. And so when Spain took a bunch of ships to the Central America region and they plundered a bunch of silver, they instantly became much more wealthy in the eyes of their peers because they can ship that silver back and then use it to buy goods. So they expanded money supply by discovering new sources of silver. And this is how, the economy used to be operated. So I think it's kind of fascinating that we have, Bitcoin, which is sort of anchored on energy usage, but then is also scale in transient. So like as more people spend more money actually creating these machines, the difficulty increases proportionally, right? So it doesn't actually make you, significantly more powerful immediately. It sort of is more kind of resistant, elastic to the evolution of the market structure. But I do believe that all of the utility that we want to see with digital assets, so things you want to do with games, things you do with social identity, so to decentralize IP ownership, all of this stuff is going to be run on blockchains that have very minimal footprints. And this is going to be the majority of our economy transactions.
Okay, so you mentioned that, I mean, you're right. Like, I think proof of stake is becoming probably like, it's going to become the standard. And so you'll have Bitcoin versus all the other chains. Do you think Bitcoin will continue to play a role because it's, where the vast majority of the crypto wealth and assets are already being held? Or do you think do you think Bitcoin would eventually change to a different protocol, or by design, is that even possible?
Yeah, I think Bitcoin is very unique in how much adoption it's already seen. I think there's probably very few people on the whole planet, 7 billion people, who have not heard about Bitcoin yet, right? And so that's kind of a interesting state to be in. It's very difficult for me to see Bitcoin being replaced by another project. I do think that there can be significant improvements to the existing protocol. That's going to have to come from the collective making that decision together. And I think one of the most beautiful things about blockchain in general is that they are open to change. Compared to governments, right? Blockchains are actually composed of a bunch of individuals, and if you have good ideas, you can quickly see your idea be recognized and debated among the people. And for the most part, these things are also open source. So there could be forks of Bitcoin and forks of many other chains that actually offer alternatives to whatever statement they have. And then the proof is in the pudding. You can't coerce people to adopt your system, but if people like a system enough, they can elect to move themselves over, and then they sort of spend their time and energy on the new one.
Okay, love it. Love the optimistic point of view here. All right. Third popular internet opinion, then I think we'll go to a few more questions in an open discussion. So third popular internet opinion, because crypto only services a very small portion of the population, especially if you compare it to like the global finance industry, for example, its emissions per capita is obviously very high and unjustified. True, false, or maybe? Either one. Donovan?
Yeah, it's a tough question. I'm just thinking how to get at the angle of this, right? It's definitely true that relative to the traditional banking system, crypto is being used by much less people. But if you're someone who's fundamentally bullish about crypto, you think that it has a huge the infrastructural differences, right, from the centralized rails by which the traditional system exists on. If you think that it is a foundation by which a lot of innovation can take place on, then I would say it's not I don't think it's a waste. But if you think that a lot of this is just more of the same of what we already have, then definitely, yes, it is. It would be considered a waste.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on how you measure the traditional banking infrastructure. So some interesting stats as well, right? So El Salvador used to have, I think, after 2 decades of like banking inclusive finance, about 3 million people with bank accounts. And after I think about 90 days or 100 days of the Bitcoin implementation of them, Bitcoin being accepted, there were 5 million wallets created. So over 3 months, they did more in terms of getting people access to finance than the last 10 years. Philippines has an 85% unbanked population, and over the last 12 months, right, Axie has added about 3.5 million wallets in the Philippines, which again is kind of a reference to speed. So I sort of believe that the places where there is not a lot of penetration of existing architecture for whatever reason, right, logistics, internet connectivity, or just even physical infrastructure with roads, like crypto offers a way more scalable possibility. And the second thing is, with a bank account, you can't really do much except receive money. With a MetaMask wallet or digital asset wallet, you can actually participate and earn assets online based on your time, based on your activity, based on your awareness. And so the degree of flexibility and interactability is actually 10, 100 times more useful. So I think these two dimensions both factor in to utility of the systems.
Okay, nice. All right. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, maybe just one point, right? And also, I think that a lot of these comparisons between the energy consumption of crypto as a whole and the traditional financial system, right? The comparison is a little bit skewed in the sense that it doesn't capture a lot of the discoordination that central banking policies have on traditional financial system, right? So whenever the Fed or the central bank announces a huge change, they're going to tweak interest rates or whatever, right? Millions of traders, millions of people across the world are shifting their assets in and out of different investments because the markets are reacting to this. So all of that takes energy consumption as well. And that, I think, on that aspect of it, I think that's what blockchains and crypto have a little bit more of an edge over the traditional financial system, because it's not susceptible to that kind of arbitrary wind blowing, policies changing arbitrarily to the forces of politics. That gives some form of certainty to people who are trading and holding their assets in crypto. So at least on that end, when you view it through that angle, it's a lot less energy efficient in a way.
Cool. All right, thanks, both. I think you guys have introduced a lot of good nuances to the typical climate and crypto conversation. So my follow-up questions are, in general, can you share some positive climate use cases of NFTs, DAOs, Web3 initiatives across that you're seeing and that maybe we should all be paying more attention to? Max, do you want to? Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Donovan.
Yeah, no, I have an example off the top of my head, not NFT specifically, but I don't know if Max has already touched on this, but I think one of the underrated points in this energy debate on Bitcoin is that a lot of Bitcoin mining, Ethereum mining, is actually helping to improve the competitiveness of energy markets, in the sense that when you study energy markets, actually a lot of them across the world are terribly inefficient because they are drilling for oil in the middle of the sea, right? And with the oil, you get a lot of methane gas as well. And methane gas is expensive to transport for miles, right? And what a lot of Bitcoin miners have done is to sort of relocate their mining operations to those sites and to use those energy for their own generators and for their own mining. So in a way, it indirectly improves the energy market because it gives a profit incentive for a lot of these energy operators, energy companies to invest in the types of technologies, solar technologies, renewable technologies that will improve their bottom line and their revenue. And I think one of the company was called I think it was called Giga, but it's called Crusoe Energy Systems, right? So I recommend anyone to just Google it, and I think it's a huge story right there, right? They're turning a problem into a solution. It's a portable market that crypto is taking with them.
Max, any exciting projects that you see on the crypto and climate front that?
One is we're actually working with Crusoe. So the Sustainable Bitcoin Standard I mentioned actually has Crusoe as a design partner. So we're actually going to be recognizing the sort of carbon savings from the methane portion, actually trying to make that into a system that can be accepted. So it's very, very, very cool that there are sort of these real world application units of actually energy consumption, especially waste energy. And then the other dimension of what we're thinking a lot about is actually designing green metaverses. So as we think about the world, we actually have a lot of the environment attributes of the world today not being captured by the traditional economic system. What is the value of saving an animal, right, from extinction? Do you get paid for it? You don't get paid for it. It's just altruism. You get in this little photo log in charity case. But that animal's existence actually ensures the rest of our food chain supply chain. So what we want to do is actually to look at how carbon credits evolved, which were essentially, they were totally free to emit CO2. Now we actually have to pay money, right? We start assigning value to environmental attributes, and we want to do the same thing for biodiversity, for water and water resources, and also for gender diversity and education. These are SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, that actually today have real consequences for how our world is shaped, but do not actually have representation in the physical economy. And so we have this alliance called the Impact Nfd Alliance. It's the largest of its kind in the world. You can find us online just by Googling Impact NFT. And what we do is try to create a pathway for the most significant nonprofits and NGOs to identify partners who can work with on the digital asset and the NFT side. And so far, we've facilitated maybe 15 projects already, and there's a lot more that we hope to do. And then sort of to build on this idea is, how do we actually make the people who participate have long-term value? So here in Hong Kong, we have Sandbox, which is one of the world's leading NFT metaverse companies. The value appreciation of Sandbox has been tremendous, right? And it's made a lot of people very rich. But that richness does not reflect back into solving social issues. So people who are individually wealthy can choose to invest in the money in philanthropy. There's no direct bearing. So the idea of a green metaverse is actually a piece of land where every type of land sale actually comes back to fund sustainability and conservation. So as more people participate here, you just from your natural economic activity, you actually start driving value to help the places where you need to go. So that's kind of the sort of long-term process. And we're very lucky to work with the WWF in a number of countries actually on this topic. So we hope to launch across Asia Pacific in the next few months. And this is something that, welcome people in the audience to think through. Right? You too can also do something like this. You can actually make impact projects that are related to real world consequences.
Nice. Max, this obviously aligns with the project that I was telling you about. So it is, and you're seeing a lot of NFT collections like this come out more recently, but so I'm working on a project where it is tied to the overall conservation of various ecosystems. And so we direct a portion of the proceeds from the NFT collection into individual charities and nonprofits who are working front lines to preserve that particular ecosystem. So Earth has 8 major ecosystems, so it's aligned with like a number of charities that are working to preserve those. So yes, I think that you are seeing a lot more projects like this come out. And I think you also mentioned the question of inequality, and as well as like where the concentration of wealth is going, which brings us to this question from Victor, which is one obstacle in the eventual widespread adoption of Bitcoin is that because the early adopters of Bitcoin are disproportionately enriched as the Bitcoin prices rise, as latecomers adopt Bitcoin, it leads to massive wealth inequality, which is actually mirrored into what our current financial system display has as well. So how do we kind of solve the inequality in terms of, I think this goes back to whether or not we treat crypto as a speculative asset or not, but how do we kind of make sure that the Web3 financial riches, if you will, are a little bit more proportionally spread out than what we see in the current global financial system?
Well, I think, the concentration of wealth is very interesting. It's very difficult to estimate until you have these kind of censuses. But actually in the digital world, it's self-disclosive. So you can actually see every single address and how much is behind them. There are statistics compiling the wealth concentration of the top X number of wallets for these digital economies. And what's really fascinating to me is that you can actually create allocations algorithmically based on the concentration. So something happened, kind of very, very concrete example is this chain called Telos. And Telos actually is an EOS chain derivative. But what they did was they actually capped it at maximum holding address of some number. So basically forked the EOS, they took a snapshot, they basically cut off all of the whale addresses above a certain amount, and then they launched a new chain. And that new chain now is being run and exists. And so the UBI concept, or the sort of general wealth distribution of Telos, is actually much more transparent and fair. And it's possible to start these kind of cycles. That's never been done before possible. It's never been possible. You can actually just restart a new economy, right, by taking a snapshot and then assigning people value. But here we are. And then to the point that that some of the major chains actually have pretty strong concentrations, it's true, right? Bitcoin has a number of people who own a bunch of Bitcoin. Ethereum has similar concepts. But to me, it's really about from where we go today, which is like roughly a few 100 million, 100-200 million people in crypto overall, to like the next billion, right? And so that process is going to be where a lot of the wealth distribution thoughts are going to be coming in. And what's beautiful about crypto is that it actually parameterizes this particular space. In other things, you don't have a choice of whether or not wealth distribution happens. Here, you can actually have a giant graph that says, hold on, we see accumulation at the whale level. We need to sort of do stuff to basically make that number come back down so you can actually, react and participate in real time.
Yeah, no, I think a lot of what Max says is right? And one of the earlier points that Max made, right, was on how the crypto system is fundamentally permissionless, right? And if we're making comparisons to the traditional financial system, I think that yes, while it's true that there are certainly inequalities in crypto, the inequalities in the traditional system are 100-fold or 1,000-fold, right? And maybe the best way to sort of illustrate this is just to look at how people can enter the system. In crypto, anyone with a smartphone and internet can immediately go onto an exchange and buy some crypto. That's not the same for people who are living in countries, especially where authoritarian economies, where they don't have those privileges, right? For example, in Greece, where inflation is rampant, the government actually imposes capital controls because a lot of the Greeks, when they get their salary, obviously they don't want to lose their money to inflation. So they're trying to convert it to the USD, right? And the Greece government basically says, hang on, I don't want you selling off my currency. So I'm going to put a regulation in place and stop you from doing that. In other words, just eat the inflation, just lose your money. Right. And that's just one example of many, right? And those types of problems, those political regulations are not something that is pervasive in crypto, at least not yet, right? But I think there's good reason to assume that crypto is going to tend towards less inequality, although undoubtedly there will be some.
All right, great. So we are actually at the end of our time, but I just want to give you each, if there is one takeaway or one thing that you would really like to clarify when it comes to the crypto and climate conversation, any parting words for our viewers today?
I guess maybe for myself, I tend to, whenever I look at this topic, right, I tend to see that people tend to pit Bitcoin and Ethereum and other blockchains in a kind of like a horse race, and who is doing better on the environmental front. And I don't like that framing because it assumes that all the blockchains are working towards a similar goal, when in fact, blockchains are all working towards different goals, right? And that's the beauty of crypto. It's like an archipelago of different products that are driving towards different ends. So Bitcoin is enormous, has a much higher carbon footprint, but they're trying to do one thing and only one thing, which is to process transactions. And then Ethereum is trying to do some of that, but as well, it's going to let you make domain names on it, trade NFTs on it, etc., etc. And then other layer one blockchains have other purposes. So depending on your purpose, your blockchain should be designed differently, and the different design will lead to a different carbon footprint. So I think maybe my closing message is try not to look at it at only the carbon footprint or only the CO2 emissions. You have to evaluate it beyond that. Like, what is the blockchain doing and what is the value add here? And maybe that value add, the carbon footprint doesn't match to that value add, but maybe it does and it's worthwhile. The CO2 emissions are worthwhile.
Okay. All right. I think a very measured and good perspective to take. Max?
Yeah, I would say that our major inspiration is that the climate change crisis requires us to actually reassign value to carbon negative solutions. And this is a policy decision that needs to happen at the central bank level, has at the government level, and also at the individual personal sort of choice level. What's really interesting about crypto and crypto's entire derivative sort of subsector is that it actually allows us for the first time in a very long time to reimagine where we assign value to. And the projects that are running protocols like Celo, for example, is a great example of this. They're actually choosing to base the treasury of their concept on natural resources. So carbon credits actually start to be reflected or actually in real value through the Trello, stablecoin mechanism. So stuff like this actually to me is a great inspiration because we can't rely on the traditional architecture, what got us into the climate crisis already, to wake up one morning and decide to be completely different. We need to have disruptive innovation, and we need to have disruptive innovation at the fundamental monetary policy level. So blockchain offers us that opportunity. We have a chance to build new central banks that actually run on carbon and run on sort of green digital assets and actually assign value to biodiversity. So these are kind of the hopes that I really want to see more of in the space, and hope that our audience gets to participate in this journey together.
Okay, awesome. Thank you both so much. This was super fun and enlightening. So for everybody watching, of course, Max is from Carbon-Based and working on a variety of other projects, including Impact NFT. And Donovan is writing over at Bankless and continues to think deeply about these questions as we go forward. So thanks everyone for joining. Thanks Max and Donovan for your time today. Appreciate all of your insights.
Thanks for having me.
Bye guys. See you all next time.
Maria, thank you, Donovan. Bye guys.